This is week 1. So it's titled, At the Heart of Silence, the Eternal Word. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, these immortal lines appear. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Human vision beholds individuality and separation everywhere. Divine vision beholds the oneness of cosmic vibration, of which all things, no matter how diverse, are manifestations. Cosmic sound, or the Word of God, and cosmic light, these are eternal. The Word, as revealed to us by our senses, is illusory. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda relates an early experience he received of the divine aspect of reality. He writes, "Sitting on my bed one morning, I fell into a deep reverie. What is behind the darkness of closed eyes? This probing thought came powerfully into my mind. An immense flash of light at once manifested to my inward gaze. Divine shapes of saints, sitting in meditation posture in mountain caves, formed like miniature cinema pictures on the large screen of radiance within my forehead. 'Who are you?' I spoke aloud. 'We are the Himalayan yogis.' The celestial response is difficult to describe. My heart was thrilled. 'Ah, I long to go to the Himalayas and become like you.' The vision vanished, but the silvery beams expanded in ever-widening circles of infinity. What is this wondrous glow? I am Ishvara. I am light. The voice was a murmuring cloud. I want to be one with thee. Out of the slow dwindling of my divine ecstasy, I salvaged a permanent legacy of inspiration to seek God." Wise are we if we meditate on that experience of Yogananda's and salvage from it even a breath of his inspiration. For quite simply, there is nothing else. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 7th chapter, I make and unmake this universe. Apart from me, nothing exists, O Arjuna. All things, like the beads of a necklace, are strung together on the thread of my consciousness and are sustained by me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, which is a book of prayer poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. Tune us that we may hear thy voice. Volumes of thy Savior voice resound through the loudspeaker of every loving heart. The voice of thy wisdom roams through the ether of space, seeking everywhere hearts that are tuned to ecstasy. Sadly, thy warning sermons pass unheard by souls deafened with the static of sense pleasures. O divine broadcaster, tune our souls, long distracted by the static of our indifference. Fine-tune us with the delicate touch of soul perception. Grant us the privilege of hearing thy magic melodies in the ecstasy of divine awakening. I don't know if you caught it when Dharmini began the reading, and she said, "This is week 1." And I don't know if there was I felt a little tremor in the room saying, "No, it's week 2 of the year. We read these each week." And so we've begun with a new set of readings for 2016, obviously. But week 1, we never get to read, almost always at Ananda, because week 1 is also being the first week of the year. The first Sunday of the year usually falls around the time of Yoganandaji's birthday. And so the whole of that Sunday satsang, as in fact was the case last Sunday, is focused on Master's birthday. And so week 1 quietly goes out the window, the reading for week 1. And after enough years of ignoring it, I thought, let's have week 1, even if it's week 2. And at the heart of silence, the eternal word, and that passage in the Bible about in the beginning was the Word, is so, well, let me just say I didn't fully understand it, or even understand it, barely understand it when I first heard it. But after coming to the yogic path, it starts to make sense, because we're aware that the word is referred to as Amen, or Om, or Amin, or Ahunavar, this sacred vibration, referred to in many different religions, that vibration which manifests and creates the universe. And so, if you are sort of friends with Om and know about Om and say, yes, yes, Om is fine, then when you hear about the word and you say, yes, Om, yeah, it makes sense. And if you know that Om in the yogic literature is described as sounding like the ocean roar, is one way of describing how it sounds, which you can hear in meditation. Then when you hear in the Bible, read in the Bible that it says that his voice was that of many waters, you start, oh, okay, well, it's ocean and waters, okay, it all fits together. When you have an understanding of the inner teachings, at their source, all the teachings are one. There's really only one way there's only really one reality. There are many ways to describe the reality, but in essence, there's really only one. And so some will give it this expression or this emphasis, also according to the understanding of the people at the times. At the time. Yoganandaji couldn't write this poem about finally tune my radio of my heart before there were radios. No one would know. I don't know if he has one in there about let me ride a flying saucer to go into, visit thee or something, but, eventually he'll come up with something that we wouldn't be able to relate to, and we would then be confused. Let me walk on rainbows of radiant light. That sounds maybe poetic, but maybe it could be literally true. And we would say, I don't understand. But radios, we understand. But before that, before there were radios, television, and so on, we wouldn't understand. That's why it's so helpful, given that truth is one, still, to study or be exposed to an expression of that truth that has come relatively recently in time. Because you can relate to it in your own language, according to metaphors and images that we're familiar with in this modern day. And so, it's also important to remember that in the reading that Yoganandaji has this experience. He was ill. No, he wasn't ill. He was just meditating in his bed. This is the first sort of vision he describes as having himself as having in Autobiography of a Yogi, of seeing the Himalayan masters, and then also seeing Ishwara, saying, I am Ishwara, I am light, and how he says, I want to go to the Himalayas and be like you. And some of you know the story of how he tried to make it to the Himalayas and didn't quite make it, but then found his freedom at the feet of his Himalayan master, Swami Sri Yukteswarji. I hope that all of us have had some kind of an experience like that. Maybe not as grand or as vivid, but some kind of awakening. Because he said, from that vision, I salvaged a lifelong desire to seek God. That vision changed him. And in fact, that's the there's a teaching in that too. Sometimes we will have visions, we will have experiences, and we'll have dreams, and we won't know, now is this a true sort of superconscious dream from God, or is it just me sort of gurgling about and so on? Sometimes I've had dreams of Swami Kriyanandaji, and they've been very vivid, and he said something to me very specifically that has been not only helpful, but has sort of stayed with me. And in fact, during his lifetime, he would mention sometimes that people tell me that they have dreams of me saying something to them, which actually I did want to say to them. And so, it sounds plausible. He said, I'm not aware of, any of what's going on here, but it is something that was on my mind to tell them. And so, sometimes I would have a dream of Swami Kriyananda and just kind of, see him. It would not seem very particularly vivid. It might have been subconscious, but I was glad. I would take any dream. But the question of any kind of experience like this, how do we know if it's really sort of from our higher self or has a higher reality than just little gurglings in our brain? And from what Yoganandaji said, I salvaged a lifelong desire to seek God. In other words, that experience changed him. And yes, he was an avatar and already came and liberated, but just putting that to the side for the moment. If you have a dream or if you have an experience that changes you, that's a sign that it may have, been superconscious, we would say, instead of subconscious. It changes you. It may change your direction in life. It may just heal a certain thing in your heart. It may help you with a positive attitude that you've been working on. That change is an indication of that it was superconscious. Another indication is that when you try to remember it, it's vivid. You can remember every detail. You can suddenly put yourself back and sort of relive the whole thing just as sort of sharply and clearly as when it first happened. As opposed to saying, yeah, I saw Yogananda and it was on a boat and it was on the beach. And actually it wasn't Yogananda, it was Bob was it? Then it's not superconscious. Then it's just kind of subconscious. Again, good to have good dreams, fine. But just to say, it should be clear and vivid. Same thing if it's a meditative experience. It's that same thing. Sometimes we'll have some kind of sort of weird images and not be really sure. So clarity, easy to recall it, and then it changes you. That's the mark of superconscious experience. And again, as I said, I would hope that all of us have had some experience, maybe one day or maybe a gradual building up over time of that same moment in our lives that Yoganandaji described of saying, there is something more. I know there's something more and I want to seek it. And for some of us, for many of us, that moment may either have happened or have been strengthened when we read Autobiography of a Yogi. I know that was my experience. I was in college, and there was a man who came to speak at my college, and he was speaking, he was coming from Microsoft. And so I was part of the sort of Computer Science Students Association, and one of the students of that had invited this man to speak. And so he gave a talk on creativity in technical disciplines was the name of the talk. And basically his thesis was that the same kind of creativity it takes to make a computer program is the same kind of creativity it takes to write a poem or paint a painting or something. That somehow that creative flow is more or less the same, even though it finds expression even in what some people would consider just prosaic and boring computer code. No computer scientists would ever feel that way, but non-computer scientists might. After all, the computer should just do its job. Luckily, I know there are many computer scientists in the room. So he gave this talk, and I was sitting there. This was my senior year in college, and so I was sitting like a senior does, just kind of, slouched back in the chair. And he said, you have energy in your body that helps your mind. And really? And then he said, you always notice that when people are sitting up straight, that they have more energy. And in fact, the brightest guys in the room and the ones from whom come the best questions are always those sitting up. And so I kind of I wanted to be one of the brightest guys in the room, and so I sat up, and I suddenly felt, I feel more awake. I feel more present. It's true what he's saying. I don't think I'd ever sat up straight before in my life. No, I had, but still not in a lecture like that after classes were over and everything. So just, okay. And then he said, if you are feeling low energy, he was talking also about the gunas of all things in the middle of this computer science talk. He didn't call them gunas, but he basically talked about a sort of high creative vibration, a restless vibration, and sort of a low energy, sleepy vibration. And so I had studied a little bit of Indian philosophy in another course in college, and so I thought, this is gunas he's talking. I know what you're talking about. And it was kind of odd to me, just like, what's going on here? And then so I wasn't yet interested, though. I should say that. I mean, I was just like, very guna. Oh, okay, great. And then he said, if you're feeling low energy, you can raise your energy by using the body. You can, for example, walk in place like this and use an affirmation. I am awake and ready. I am awake and ready. And of course, people in the audience are going, what is happening here? You do not come into a class of very stuffy people like us and just start acting out like that. Who let him in? It was just, everyone was just so challenged by his just sort of courage to just do this. I mean, it was a room full of 80 people. And, professors too. And then he said, if that doesn't work, you can say, I am positive, energetic, enthusiastic. And he jumped much higher than I just did, because I have this leg injury, I can't jump. And his shirt flew up, and his little tummy was there, and I started clapping like that, not much. I just thought, he has guts. He has courage. And he did something that no one would do. And it had a point. It wasn't that he just went, something crazy like that. I mean, he did something that had a point. It was like, this is how you can raise your energy. Of course, I won't embarrass myself or anyone by demonstrating it. He didn't hold back like that. In fact, that happened. Master would run onto the stage during his early days doing his U.S. tour and run onto the stage with his hair flying and say, how feels everyone? And the whole audience would say, awake and ready. And then one of the ministers told Swamiji, I'd like to do things a little differently here. And so he came walking onto the platform and he said, good morning. I trust at this time that everyone present is awake and ready. You see, and nothing against that guy, but just to say that it's like, this is the difference. And so this man, Satyaki, his name is Craig Brockschmidt, but Satyaki is his spiritual name. He had the courage to just show us what could help us. Again, in the middle of this very intellectual crowd, and a fairly intellectual topic as well, or at least presentation. And so I thought, I like this guy. And he has something that I haven't really seen before. But then at the rest of his talk, he finished his talk, and then there was we wanted to have an after talk sort of gathering with the students, so people would meet him and talk to him and so on. And we wanted to make sure that students came to that, so there was pizza. So then there was a after talk pizza session. So everybody was going to go for that. But then there was an opportunity to go out to dinner with him. This is sort of what we did when we had visiting lecturers and so on. And so the student who was hosting him said, nobody signed up for the dinner because they're all going to have the pizza and no one wants to pay for dinner. I don't know why they didn't sign up, but they did. He said, you have to come. because otherwise it's just going to be me, and that's too embarrassing. And I said, I have to get a haircut. It was true, but I had already made up my mind I'm going to get a haircut. He said, listen, you can get the haircut and then go, during the pizza and then come for dinner. And I said, I've got physics tonight. I've got to do my physics homework and so on. Which even to me sounded a little lame. But I had this plan. And then I looked at him, this Satyaki, who was at the end of his talk and people had finished greeting him. And he was just quietly winding up an electrical cord. And I noticed that he was just very poised, even throughout his talk. He was poised or centered. I didn't know such words. But he was very in command of his faculties and command of his abilities. He seemed to me a little bit like a martial artist who had lots of energy but wasn't wasting it, kind of just wiggling around like I tended to do, and so on. He was very accomplished, and yet he was also very quiet in a way, but could talk. All these things. There's just something about him. And so then I heard sort of a thought in my head. Something is being offered to you. Something is being offered. And that was unusual to me because in life I was not offered things. I sought after and took them. I'm not away from people, but I mean, it was like I chose a goal and I pursued it and I achieved it. I set the course of my life. I wasn't offered things. I had no idea how much, in retrospect, I realized I had been offered an awful lot. But I didn't think in terms of being offered. I thought in terms of seeking, choosing, achieving, and then having. And so, but this instead was coming to me. So then I thought, okay, all right. So I said, I'll get the haircut, which I did. I guess I had to prove that much, but then I'll go and have dinner. And so I joked once, though, when I was envisioning all this sort of many years later, that, probably I had put out enough cries for help, which I had, that then, Master finally said, oh, look, Dharmaraj wants to come back. Satyaki, go get him. That's how it is when we have people who introduce us to the path. You sometimes feel like Master sends them into your life to get you back on track, back on the path. And then sometimes that person shares the journey with you, which is wonderful. And Satyaki is still a part of Ananda, and it's been very nice, having that relationship all these 20 years. And then sometimes the person doesn't. And then if nothing else, there's just that feeling of gratitude to that person who was the channel or the instrument to help us reconnect with the spiritual path. Remember, of course, the relationship is between us and God. And, it can also be, if you, for example, are on this path, it's between us and the Guru. It's between us and Master. But still, we remember with gratitude the friends along the way, even if they've since moved on. And so that was a moment for me of awakening, because I was intrigued so I finally said to him, as often happens, so what do you do that makes you like that? That's as well as I could put it. He said, well, I meditate. And have you read Autobiography of a Yogi? And I had not heard of it or anything. And so when I got his email address and we started corresponding, and I went to the ananda.org website, which had been up for about 6 months at that time. It had just started, and there was a place, click here, and Autobiography of a Yogi, and yes. And so I think I ordered Autobiography of a Yogi, the level 1 book course, the level 2 book course. I was just sort of stacking it up. And so that was the beginning, or the what's the word? I don't know, assuming, or, basically starting on, again, this spiritual path in this lifetime. So those moments of awakening, those moments of inspiration, those times when you have suddenly gone deeper than before, or you've made a quantum leap, depending on the metaphor, whatever you want to use. Those are to be cherished. And it's very helpful to, it's very helpful to remember those, to bring them back up again. We sometimes hit dry spots on the spiritual path where sadhana is difficult, or we come to very difficult tests outwardly, and it kind of shakes us a little bit, or we are just kind of in survival mode, where we're just kind of marching. And there isn't as much joy, or there isn't as much of that carefreeness that we had in the beginning. Though we're doing it, we're going through some hard karma for purification. The karma is there, it's hard, just let's finish it, so that we don't have to do more of it, or have to do it again. And so, and then it's nice in times like that to remember when we, these early moments on the spiritual path of inspiration, of reconnection and everything. I was just remembering, speaking of go finish the karma now so you don't have to face it later. I was in a PhD program, and I was deciding to graduate with a master's, which is a nice way of saying dropping out. I was going to graduate with a master's degree. And so in order to get that master's degree, I just had to submit my thesis and all that, which was pretty much wrapped up. But I also had to, I didn't have to take the oral qualifying exam for the PhD program. In other words, that was what you normally did if you were going to the PhD program. You hand in your master's thesis and then you take the oral qualifying exam. And I was not excited to take the oral qualifying exam. 3 professors from different departments of this university just staring you down and firing questions at you. And, there was all kinds of bones outside the hallway of all the students who had gone before and so on. And so I figured out that, technically speaking, I don't have to take the exam because I graduated with a master's. And sure, I was going to take a leave of absence from the PhD program for 1 year and then 2 years. I ended up moving to Ananda, Palo Alto, which is Ananda's community in Silicon Valley. And I became a school teacher. And so I wrote to I had a scholarship and I had the university. I wrote to them after saying, I'm taking a leave of absence, but I'll be in touch again in a year. And so after another year, they wrote to me saying, and I said, yes, I'm going to take another year of absence. And they said, fine, because you could take 2 without getting punished. And then at the end, it was like, you better come back now or that's it. And I said, I'm pursuing an opportunity in Silicon Valley. I was teaching school children at the Ananda school. But still, they probably to that, oh yeah, we lose a few to the Silicon Valley, fine, makes sense. So when I took this oral qualifying, when I knew I didn't have to take it, I thought, I could just slip out the door and no one would notice and I wouldn't have to do this exam. Because why? It's scary. Who wants to go through that? But then the thought came to me, who wants to reincarnate just to take an oral qualifying exam? I mean, what a mess that is. Even to get to the state of oral qualifying exam, you have to go through, diapers and, then be 13 and 14 and horribly insecure, and then high school where everybody's mean, and then hope you get into a good college, and then you don't know what kind of parents you're going to get. I mean, let me just do it now and get it over with so I don't have to come back for it. Because again, I was so afraid of it. I knew that I had to face it or else it would just be lurking around in some future lifetime. Oh, remember me back in 1997? And so I took, I went through the process and all the professors got ready and they were just, very just kind of, I can't say that part yet. Went really early. I thought, I'll go early to the conference room. I'll set up the projector. In those days, I'm sure you remember, they had you had clear, transparent slides, and you put them on the little thing with the mirror, and then you went like this and went like that, and so on. So I got that whole machine ready. I had my slides ready. I figured I'll be there early so I won't be nervous. I was horribly nervous. And I set everything up so that so there's no last minute, just kind of everything's. And then I went out of the room to like go wash my hands or something. I came back and the door to the room was locked. And I must have unwittingly, pressed the button or something and then locked it. So I just thought, well, let's see. I could have a heart attack, or I think I'm just going to walk away. And so I just walked away, and I was just, Master, I'm here in this thing, I have no idea. And then I just went back to the washroom and kind of washed my hands again and kind of just said Om. And then came back and the door was unlocked. And so I thank you, Master. I don't know how he did it, but he did it so that I was able to go in. And then when I faced these guys down, and of course, this was at MIT, and so they have this little thing about like, if we're going to give you a degree, you must be worthy, and you should come out of it with a few scars and smoking a little bit. We don't just hand these things out to anybody. And so they were, this kind of face. Not kind of like, oh, come on, we know you're going to do a good job. And so I gave my talk, which was basically about, you give your talk about your thesis, and at least that's easy because you've been working on it for like a year, and you put your little story together, and you kind of do the song and dance and all this, and they more or less kind of go along with it. But then there's a guy who's from computer science, but outside your particular area, so he can throw you a question from any part of computer science. So he asked me a question from operating systems that was the same question that had been on my midterm exam for that when I took that class, and then the final exam. So it was like, I'd already gone through that question twice, plus of course we covered it in the lecture, and so it was just like, thank you, Divine Mother. So, well, since you asked, and so then I went through, and was able to answer that question. And again, it was really just a little bit like, Swamiji having to translate a passage from the Bible from Greek to English, and he just said, well, if I pick a chapter and read it, I'll be lucky, and that will be the one. Read it in English, and that will be the one that we're asked to translate. And it was true. And so he just repeated it in English. Don't need the Greek. I know which chapter this is. It was the same kind of thing. Here's a question that you already know the answer to. Okay. So then the next question was from a professor in engineering outside of computer science. So then they can throw you any kind of question from anywhere. And so he asked me a question about probability theory. And so I was working my way and answering it, and then I got to a part where I was stuck. And I was just sort of thinking about it, and then they do try to kind of help you along a little bit, like here's the next step. And so he said something, and I said, oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was exponentially distributed. I thought it was exponentially distributed waiting times and so on, which I really did. I wasn't like trying to show off. I really did think that. And finally, one of the other professors said, what would you have done if it was exponentially distributed? And I said, oh, well, in that case, I would have done da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, because that's what I was going to do anyway, but it was wrong. And then later, one of my friends said, so let me get this straight. At your oral qualifying exam, you asked the questions to yourself and then got to answer them. Because that's basically what kept happening. And so finally, the third question was supposed to come from my specific field of computer science. But I was lucky to have this professor who was known for figuring, look, you got to answer at least 2 out of the 3 questions. And he's already done a thesis in this particular area. So if he gets the first 2 questions right, I won't ask him the third question. Because he's already answered 2 out of 3 right. And then I don't have to come up with a question from the professor's point of view. And so he was known for doing this, I found out later. And so he came up, every time though you finish the question, finish answering that, they send you out of the room. He said, and now, we will caucus, which means we will gather together, and you can leave. And so you walk outside knowing they're just talking about you, and then you come back in, and then you answer the second question. They say, okay, good, and so then you have to go out again, and then they're talking again about you. And then he said, and now we come to the fourth part of the exam. And fourth part? There was and he says, congratulations, Mr. Arnold. Just like, so anyway, that also shows you, though, maybe, that when you just do it with God and let Him help. I prayed to God as hard as I could, but I never thought He would make it in a way really so easy. I just was basically saying, dear God, please let there be some box to put my remains in when it's all done. I didn't really imagine myself just succeeding or sailing through it. And so instead there was. He was saying, look, how about this question that you know the answer to? How about that question that you know the answer to? How about that non-question? Oh, okay. And so we always have to remember that when, as it said in the reading, our vision of the world is of separation, and godly vision is of unity. So when we are seeing separation, I am different from you, or I don't like this about that, or these things aren't right. Remember, it's even Maya. Literally, Maya means in English the measurer, which implies also that which cuts apart and separates, which measures this is different from that. When we see separation, then it's Maya. And so it's okay to sort of feel united to God in your heart and then be aware superficially of distinctions. But when we are caught up in that, this and that's wrong. Remember, Master said, whenever you see something wrong, he said, it's a hard teaching. He said, remember, that wrong is in you. And that's a tough one at times, because we say, well, but it's in them too. In other words, that tendency to kind of self-justify, it's like, listen, as one saint said, he who made this world, don't you think he knows how to take care of it? Which also applies to every single person. He who made your relative, don't you think he knows how to take care of that person? And I don't just mean a difficult relative. I mean also one that we ourselves are trying desperately to take care of. Don't you think that that person's real mother knows how to take care of that person? Sometimes we are the ones who Divine Mother asks to take care of that person, but on her behalf. Not as the mother or the father or the older brother or sister or anything. Just as basically a babysitter. Just, we're hired out for a while by Divine Mother. Can you please help this soul? Why? Because, we're available? No, because it helps us too. She's amazing in how she fits everybody together so that this one's test matches perfectly with that one's tests, and each has an opportunity to grow in that way. And the test, the result, the lesson may be very different for each one. But still, it's custom made in an intricacy that only the divine could conceive of. So keep that in mind when going forward in this week. Where you see separation, try to see unity. When you see people that you're not personally involved in, but you see separation there, try to see each person's point of view. Try to understand it from each person's point of view without judging it. And then finally, when you feel that in yourself, when you feel if you feel this kind of tendency or temptation to measure yourself, don't. Just say, look, God, all of us are here because we're not yet free. So what's the point in saying, and today I'm even less free than I was? So who cares? Just love God more. As Master said, don't say, when will I have God? You have Him already. We just have to increase our knowing of that fact. God bless you.